Today, I want to present you a motorcycle manufacturer that I appreciate particularly and for various reasons. That brand is Royal Enfield. There is some very objective facts that make this brand such an important one in the motorcycle industry. I will get into the full history of the brand in that video, but if there is one thing you should remember is that the genesis of Royal Enfield dates back to the late 19th century. Their first experimental motorcycle is from 1901. They have continuously been building motorcycles over the past 123 years now. I'm sure you've seen Royal Enfields in the street and maybe your only thought was like, oh, that looks like a Chinese built motorcycle. I don't even know what that brand is. And sometimes it can be a little overlooked. Well, next time you see one, know that this motorcycle just parked on the street found its origins about 120 years ago. Let's dive right into it and start with what I would call the origins and all of the British years. So in 1891, two entrepreneurs, Bob Walker-Smith and Albert Eady, decided to buy a small needle manufacturing business out of Redditch in England. And this is the first fun fact about those years and how the transport industry just came out of nowhere to become one of the biggest industry and the biggest stake in the early 1900s. Funnily enough, a lot of companies that started building some engine-powered cars or motorcycle, they started out by being something totally different. And just like here with that needle manufacturing business, they started to get into building some transportation vehicles. 2 years after purchasing that company in 1893, they win a contract to build some parts for the Royal Small Arms Factory out of Enfield, Middlesex. Taking that as a sign, they decided to change their name into Enfield Manufacturing Company. And the following year, when they released their first house-made bicycles, they decided to call it the Royal Enfield. And at the same time, they also create their own trademark, Made Like a Gun, which is a pretty kick-ass trademark, to be honest. 5 years later, in 1898, they finally built their first motorized vehicle. I told you that those years were very experimental. Well, guess what? They built a car by putting together two bicycles. Yeah, just as simple as that. They stuck a De Dion Bouton engine in it to just make it move forward. So yeah, pretty experimental to me. And De Dion Bouton, if you're not aware of them, is one of those engine manufacturers from those years that were providing to experimental companies wanting to create vehicles, pretty much. And then finally, by 1901, they present their first ever motorcycle. It's a work of design by one of the founders, Walker Smith, and a Frenchman called Jules Gobier. This motorcycle is basically a bicycle on which they install a small engine at the front of the steering head. Again, pretty experimental, although even later in the 20th century, we saw some companies like Solex make some mopeds with that design. And I would say that 1909 is actually the first time that they built a motorcycle that's the closest to what we will be knowing after that. This time the engine is not at the front, it's in the middle of the motorcycle. It's a V-twin engine provided by the Swiss company Moto Sacoche. That first Royal Enfield V-twin won a lot of competitions the following year, including one that's very important, which is the John O'Groats to Land End Trial, which is a 603 miles trip from the very top of Scotland to the very bottom of England. Shortly after that, of course, the war happens. So, like most of the big factories, they have to dedicate their production to the war effort. I'm making a small jump into time, and I will jump to 1932, where one of the classics of Royal Enfield is being presented, the Bullet. The bike is presented at the Olympia Motorcycle Show in November 1932. The Bullet is a pretty modern motorcycle, and it comes in three different engine capacities, the 250, 350 and 500 cc's, and they are all equipped with what we call the slopper engine. The following years, the Bullet will keep on being updated with new components and higher performance, up until the Second World War happens, obviously, and where Royal Enfield has to dedicate its production to the war effort. They are particularly going to be known for what we call the Flying Flea, which are those very small 125cc motorcycles that could be put in crates to be parachuted to the troops that are beyond the enemy line. Just like it was until very recently, one of the biggest marketing arguments for any car or motorcycle companies at the time was to win some trophies. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday, you know the drill, it was exactly the same at the time. For motorcycles, obviously road racing was important, but also trial was very important. And so in 1948, two modified Bullet Royal Enfields are being entered in the ISDT, the International 6 Days Trial, where those two bikes will each bring back a gold medal in their class. So needless to say that the company's power and quality of motorcycle was there. Here, I would say we get into the second part. Although it's a bit early, I think that the year 1949 is a turning point for the history of Royal Enfield. An Indian entrepreneur called K.R. Sundaram Iyer decided to launch a business to import British motorcycles to India, and he will call that business Madras Motors. Here you guessed it, one of the British manufacturers that he's gonna pick is Royal Enfield. However small it was, this is actually decisive when we know what's gonna happen afterwards. In 1955, Royal Enfield and Madras Motors decide to partner up to create Enfield India. And following this, the construction of an Indian-based factory, which is gonna produce their first motorcycles the year after that in 1956. In the late 50s, early 60s, models keep evolving. They still win a lot of races and championships. And I want to stop at the year 1964 for one very specific reason. Indeed, when we talk today about the custom motorcycle segment or the custom motorcycle trend, well, this is not new at all. When you hear the term cafe racer, that term was not created 10 years ago. It was actually already a thing in the 50s and 60s. And so in 1964, Royal Enfield decided to enter that market and offer the second model that I would consider as being a classic of the brand, the Continental GT. That motorcycle was basically a racing motorcycle for the streets. It was equipped with a fiberglass tank with clip-on handlebar, and it was made to go fast from one point to the other. And to prove that, a group of journalists were actually able to do the John O'Groats to land ends in less than 24 hours. Now confirming how important that partnership with Madras Motors was. In 1967, the Redditch factory is closed, and just 3 years after that, the second factory is being closed as well. This was kind of a big thing. Basically, Royal Enfield left its birthplace and was now being only produced in India. 10 years after that, in 1977, the first Indian-produced Bullet 350 are making their way from India to the UK and Europe. And guess what? Actually, the company still has a great following, so the sales are pretty encouraging. Then the following years, some more models are going to be produced, some more versions of the Bullet are going to be created to be exported to maintain the company's influence on the world of motorcycles. In 1994, the company is being sold to a commercial truck and tractor manufacturer called the Eicher Group. That group already had its roots in India since 1948, and when they bought the company, they decided to rename it Royal Enfield Motors Limited. Those bikes having been produced in India for that many years, there is actually one fun fact about those bikes that we can say. Obviously, in India, the riding conditions were maybe not as good as in Europe and the UK. So pretty naturally, all of those motorcycles gained some kind of a street cred about adventure riding. Those Royal Enfields were known to be solid and known to be able to go pretty much everywhere. And to illustrate that, in 1997, 40 motorcycles climbed the Kardung La, which is the highest motorable pass in the world. And that kind of set a point of reference to prove how capable those bikes are. The company keeps updating their motorcycles. In 2009, they released their classic style Bullet, which is immediately a hit. So obviously they arrived at the moment on the market that was very smart. In many instances, you can consider that Royal Enfield was probably one of the first mainstream motorcycle company producing a neo-retro motorcycle. Now, I would probably set 2013 as being Royal Enfield getting into the modern world. Indeed, on that year, they opened a new state-of-the-art factory in India, which is going to set Royal Enfield into modernity and make it ready for the following years. Again, remembering how smart they were with the classic 500, well, guess what? They were also very smart about the custom market. So in 2013, another thing happened. They re-released the Continental GT. That factory-built cafe racer, which is also a very solid base for any builder around the world. From here, I would say that the company keeps growing and keeps trying to improve their products and their presence in the world. In 2015, the company acquires Harris Performance, which is a British motorcycle design and fabrication firm, aiming at increasing the level of engineering into their motorcycles. The same year, Royal Enfield officially opens Royal Enfield North America. You guessed where, in Harley-Davidson territory in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Their expansion doesn't stop here. The next year, they decide to get into the actual adventure motorcycle segment and release the Himalayan. Just like the rest of their models, the goal here is to make a motorcycle that is visually appealing, pretty well built, cheap, easy to maintain, reliable, and you can just go everywhere with it. And from there, we get to the present years where Royal Enfield is presenting a pretty enticing range of models, in my opinion at least, where they can offer pretty much any kind of bikes, except maybe for a sport bike, all at a pretty good price point, all being pretty reliable, and all sharing the same principles that Royal Enfield had forever. Whether we want it or not, they managed to build during all of these years those motorcycles for everyone and every taste. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed that video. This is a particular format. This is about the history of a brand, and I want to know if this is the kind of videos that interest you. History is also one of my passions, so I love talking about motorcycle manufacturers and try to give you as many information as possible about a manufacturer in a hope to maybe give you the same kind of mindset that I have when I look at those bikes. You know, if you buy a Triumph, a Ducati, a Royal Enfield, a BMW, pretty much knowing what it means to own one of those bikes. Again, I may be a little too much about the things, but ask a Ducati owner if he doesn't think like that. Please drop a comment if you own a Royal Enfield. If, like me, it was maybe one of your first motorcycles, if you wish you owned one. Anyways, I really hope you enjoy my content, and if it's the case, don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel. All right, thank you guys. See you soon.